We live in a society where we are told that money is the root of all evil. Money is blamed for all woes that plague humanity, and most of us accept this belief. Money in reality is a recent technological advancement and a social tool that was only invented a few thousand years ago. Claiming money as the root of all evil must then also presume the belief that up until a few thousand years ago, there was no evil. The people who have trained us to consider money as the root of all evil are also the same people willing to commit all kinds of evils to get and control our money. Most times you hear this belief parroted by wealthy capitalists, politicians, and media personalities. Repetition is a very effective tool for reprogramming the human subconscious, and this message has been repeated to the point that those of us who have no basic understanding of what money is and how it works also repeat this message without a second thought to our friends, family, and children. The propagation of this belief is the primary cause for modern society's economic woes, because as you look around the world, it seems that the most technologically advanced societies seem to also be the most primitive in terms of civility and budget management. We have a society that is supposed to be managed and regulated by the best and brightest of us, yet they find it a challenge to balance the budget, while millions of hardworking normal American citizens are able to do so. This film would demonstrate that money is not the root of all evil, but it is instead a tool and technology to be used for the efficient transfer of energy and resources between human beings. In fact, the resources are not really relevant to the economy as much as the energy, because it is the energy and ingenuity of human beings that enables the mining and harvest of natural resources. Most people in today's economically illiterate society believe that the resources come first and that the power centers of the world are in conflict over the resources. Resources are only a distraction from the primary target, which is the control of the flow of human energy. For now, forget about conspiracies, forget about money, forget about governments, and just think about us, humans. Think about yourself first, your desires, your dreams, your ambitions, and then think about your friends, family members, and the things they hope to experience and accomplish. This short film will take you on a journey through human experience in an attempt to explain how society got to be the way that it is today. This film would also try to break complicated issues and topics down to a level that can help anyone from any background understand two facts. 1. The energy system with the greatest impact on our ability to lead a healthy and productive life is the one we understand the least. 2. There are a large number of individuals presently who benefit greatly from our confusion and lack of knowledge in the inner workings of this energy system. This presentation will not go into history, dates, details, and factoids because many have done that, and if you care to, the links will be provided below. This presentation is designed to simply step you through a foundational understanding of the true essence of energy and wealth, especially how some have learned to transmute this boundless life energy by controlling how people interact with each other. Let's take a journey through the human experience. What is life energy? There are two basic facts of human life. Men and women need to consume resources to stay alive and enjoy their life. To get those resources, men and women need to expend energy, again, to stay alive and enjoy life. This is a simple economy of one, as is one person working to attain the resources they require to live and enjoy their own personal lives. And many people do choose to live an isolated life, although they still do use products and ideas that others contributed to, but we're not going to get too complicated. You then have the secondary facts of life, which are that man is usually not alone, but surrounded by others. Men and women have different skills and abilities. Men and women want to enjoy from the skills and abilities of other men and women, and they need to exchange resources and services in order to do so. This is a natural system operating on pure capitalism, which doesn't mean greed or the desire to hurt others, but simply a society organized by the individual drive to profit. Profit means that you get more out than you put in, and in this natural energy system, most participants will only make exchanges that bring them more resources than the energy they exerted. All other notions of profit as a negative force in society are part of the agenda to control the flow of this human energy as more and more people lose connection to their energy balance and fall to all sorts of predations on their resources. So far in this journey, each person has full control over how they spend their energy and resources acquired and what they exchange them for. No matter how many people or aggregates of people you have, the system will still work the same way, following along these principles. Millions of people all have varying impulses, desires, and instincts that lead to different decisions. This is where you get supply and demand. Supply is how much of a resource there is available, and demand is how many people need or want that resource. In order for supply and demand to work, people need a convenient way of knowing what is in demand and what is in supply. The enterprising person will be keeping an eye for the resources most in demand and where to provide them, while the consumer will look for the most affordable and effective services. The most efficient way of getting this constantly changing information is through something we normally call price, which is what a resource or service or solution will fetch when traded among a group of people. When a lot of people want something that is not abundant or easy to get, the price will rise until the threat of competition sets the limit. Competition levels it off, because if you were the only person who could provide something that people needed, you could charge whatever you wanted. But the problem is that nature is massively diverse, and there are usually multiple solutions to all problems. Individuals are in the natural world able to see what other people are doing, improve on those ideas, and compete against them for a share of the consumers. The great thing about this world is that there are so many different people with varying situations and interests that there is more than enough room for most who are interested in providing a similar service to live off the profits generated. The price mechanism controls where people move, because things in high demand, i.e. a lot of people want or need them, will provide greater rewards. In this way, the most pressing needs of people are quickly met through a price system which allows supply and demand to function naturally. Well, here's where things get a little interesting. A currency is created when people have a common exchange medium they can use to trade resources and services. The value of the exchange medium is a spontaneously organizing rule system that all people who participate in the market help to steer. Each person's individual decision about how much to trade and sell for is what sets the overall price of items. This is why, depending on which area you move to, the price of certain items will change as the weather conditions and shipping distance changes, as well as how perishables are stored. The same force is the one that directs which language people speak, how the words are created and chosen. Imagine all the varying languages, dialects, and new words created by the average people over the centuries. This is a decentralized communication system in the same way that a naturally operating group of people voluntarily exchanging resources and services with each other is a decentralized energy system, with no source of authority at the center of it, but can only be documented and tracked as it evolves and grows on its own to meet the needs of the people participating. In this type of situation, everybody watches the watchers. Because if someone charges too much for a widely available resource or service, they simply won't have any buyers. And the same for those who charge too little. Others will quickly buy them out and resell for closer to the true value, which will more than likely prevent them from selling low in the future. It's the same process that happens in language when words that lose usefulness or get replaced by better expressions simply fade as less and less people use them over time, or maybe until some future time when the new social trend brings it back to life. By understanding this representation of the energy system, you also understand this fact. The value of an item in society is simply what it would trade for. You can put whatever price you want on something, but until somebody else gives you resources or services in exchange for it, it's not really worth that price. Here's the great transition. At some point, someone had the brilliant idea that instead of people carrying actual physical resources around, they could simply exchange their resources for certificates at places called banks, which could in turn be redeemed for their original value in resources at a later time. Since the technology was then new at the time, few thought of the possibility that the banks would print more certificates than their value and resources they had stored up. And let's take a look at this physically through a small example. Let's say you work and produce 1 unit of labor represented by 1 gold nugget. You go to the bank and turn the gold nuggets in for 5 certificates representing the 5 gold nuggets. At this rate, each certificate is worth 1 nugget. If the banker prints up 10 nuggets instead, then each certificate is worth only half a nugget. Makes sense so far? Well, what if when you put the nuggets in, the banker hands you 5 certificates, but then goes behind your back later when you leave and prints 5 more certificates? Now, whether you know it or not, your certificate's only worth half of a nugget. Here's a better example. Imagine you have a circle of 10 friends that trade among each other, and each of you have 10 gold nuggets. One out of your group decides to become a banker for the rest of you and prints up 100 certificates representing 1 nugget each. The gold nugget is just one among many resources and services you trade, so you use the certificates to trade other resources conveniently. Now, if all goes well, as you accumulate more and more resources, each gold nugget or certificate you've printed will be worth more and more resources, especially as technology allows you to make things faster, cheaper, and with less time and resources needed in input. This is the logical outcome of a technologically progressing society. What if instead you realize that somehow your certificates are becoming worth less and less resources, even though you keep producing more resources faster than ever before? What could be the problem, you wonder? Also, you notice that the banker is extremely wealthy while the rest of your circle is struggling to make ends meet. What happened? Well, the only explanation for something like this happening is if the banker printed more and more certificates behind the group's back without the corresponding gold nuggets. As the banker then spends the certificates with the group to buy other resources, since the newly printed certificates haven't entered the system yet, he can spend them at the original value, getting 1 gold nugget worth of resources. The rest of the group turn to realize that there are less resources to go around by the time they go to trade with the other friends. For instance, if the banker prints an additional 50 certificates and spends them with some of you, he will buy half of all the resources with the $50 certificates because your original economy had only $100 worth of resources. So as you and your friends try to trade among yourselves, you will notice it becomes harder because there are only $50 worth of resources remaining to your $150 worth of certificates. So your certificates are only worth 1/3 the original value with less resources to go around. The banker can then also proceed to sell you back the resources at their new value. And since it took half of the resources with his printed of $50, he can sell it back for $75, which is its new value since now your economy has $150 worth of certificates to get rid of for real resources that your group needs. The only thing that'll keep the banker from making the group as a whole starve to death at this point is if the group is innovative and creative enough to outpace the fraud and theft with pure genius. But even then, eventually the banker will slow down development to the point that the entire economy dies. This is not a make-believe scenario, but precisely how our present financial system runs, minus the fact that the banks borrow money from other banks, if you can wrap your head around their level of scumbaggery. The only solution to this is to have full transparency in the banks and allowing people to choose which bank they want to invest with. But the problem is that in our present society, all banks have to be governed by one central bank, which runs all the schemes. So although some of the smaller banks try to be honest, the system is rigged for liars and cheaters to win, and there's absolutely nothing that the regular people can do about it. Why? Because, jumping back to our scenario back here for a second, the banker figured out how to force everyone to use his system, and none other, by sponsoring what we now call governments. Banks are not creations of governments, but instead, modern-day governments are the creations of banks to protect themselves from the forces of the free market, which is, remember, the price mechanism and supply and demand that would force people to use other cheaper and more transparent banks. Why is it that people do not get together and create the banks they want to see and put their money together to make that vision a reality? Well, because if they try to do so, they will be violently attacked by the present banking structure. People are then forced to protest, which is essentially the same as begging the system for the freedom to create and choose. People sometimes say that the banks bought the government, but if you understand history and do your research, you realize that the banks built the governments in their modern form. You see, back before the banks redefined what it meant to be a government, you had all types of various social organization structures which represented the diversity that was then apparent through the different cultures. Now, if you look around the world, the difference between the governments is only superficial, as they all represent similar models of representation by the people for the people with support from international guess who? You guessed it, the banks, whom all governments owe a piece of their soul to. Yet the media feed us the line that, oh, the poor government is a victim of the banks and corrupt elected officials were paid off by them to sacrifice the people's interests. This is only a half-truth that completely misses the deeper revelation. The complete truth is that when you look on the world globe, the artificial lines you see that for the most part don't represent landmarks but only imaginary lines of separations were designed, sponsored, and enforced by the central banks. The bankers realized that by fencing people off from each other and force-feeding them new national identities through quote-unquote free education, the kids will grow up believing that their only birthright on this planet and in this entire cosmos is the small piece of land they call a country, and they will die and kill to keep others out of their beloved country. The old generation that remembered the earth as a boundless paradise to be explored die to a new generation that only knows their flag and their national hymn. Our emotions are artificially bound to the ideas and fairy tales that benefit only the bankers and no one else. I was born in the Ivory Coast, and up until August 7th, 1960, there was no such country, as well as many other countries from that part of Africa that claimed their independence around the same time period. Pay attention. The urge to suddenly claim independence that overtook many African nations is a prime example of the beginnings of this fragmented world at the hand of the bankers who controlled the colonization of those nations. Many of those scholars who pushed for these ideas were trained and employed by the European interests, and it wouldn't surprise me that the movement to convert these diverse African colonies into political entities was fueled by these same interests. It would be simple to do this with democracy on their side, and now nearly every African nation is working its best to emulate its European and American counterparts. The banking culture was sold to the entire world through coordinated psychological as well as tactical military assaults on the natural people of the earth. Fragmenting indigenous regions into nations made it easier to create conflicts that made the control exerted by the central bank seem necessary, when it was and still is them who caused the division initially and continue to do so in the present. One people united in care for the planet and each other would not be an easy target for predations that depend on convincing them to attack each other. This is why money is hardly ever explained to us during our years in public school and its purpose. History and management is glossed over because we're all supposed to simply trust the experts in charge when it comes to things as important and complicated as money. The truth is that money is not complicated at all and probably one of the simplest concepts which can be explained to children. Most people in the world believe that the government creates money and have no conception of why money is a tool we even use and why it has such power over nearly everything in society. The public education system imparts on most of its victims a misplaced sense of causation, making most of them unable to assign blame and responsibility where it's due, in often the most important situations. Most people have been trained to blame most of our financial troubles on the voluntary exchange of resources, when we live in a society where the voluntary exchange of resources has been made almost impossible. Some call it capitalism, the free market, market anarchy. I simply call it voluntary exchange. But a label and a name do not mean anything without a solid grasp of what we are talking about, and most people who rail against the free market fail to realize that they are railing against their own ability to decide where and how their energy is spent. Forget economics, forget money. Forget laws and governments. Simply think about the flow of human energy. Then you will understand that all politics is simply made up of people who feel they have the right to control the flow of everyone else's life energy, which leads the critical thinker to wonder, what made them so special?
And everybody that I know wants to get by, trying to get fly, wanna do better than just be survivor. It's sad to me to see how quick we're reaching down for Bible. The pages that was used to hold our people back from knowledge. That's how we start conniving, taking off from an island, making off in the piling. Wisdom is gaining silence, system forgetting minds and breaking their defenses down. And when the fence is down, it's time to let the reaping come. I get dizzy when I face the race that we become. The bag of the breezes and the good that die alone. It's sad, but it's easy to trick you into doing wrong. Pick up a phone and sit still just to hear it tone. And just vibe, let your heart beat a metronome. I get it on with a dime that'll break you home. Then get alone in my zone just to make a song. I'm not a singer, but I always make them sing along. Everybody that I know wants to get by, get by, get by.